Welcome to a new week of CNN 10. We are only on the air 2 days this week. Tomorrow's show will be our last before the Thanksgiving holiday, and we're thankful to have you watching. I'm Carl Azus at the CNN Center. A new trade deal between the United States and China could be wrapped up before 2019 is over. It could end more than a year of back and forth tariffs or taxes on goods that the two countries have placed on each other. And when U.S. President Donald Trump announced last week that the two countries were potentially close on a deal, the American stock market rose on the hopes of it. But while the U.S. National Security Advisor said phase one of an agreement was possible before December 31st, America would not be turning a blind eye to the protests in Hong Kong or some of China's other activities around the world. Why might that matter? Because business conducted between the world's two largest economies isn't just about tariffs, transport, buying, and selling. China and the U.S. have two very different systems of government, and China's communist leadership, which controls what's said in the Chinese media, has also tried to influence what's said by U.S. companies that do business in China. That's created some tough choices for them and contributed to tensions between the two nations' leadership.
The United States now recognizes China as a strategic and economic rival.
China's coveted consumer market comes with very big moral concessions for American brands and business.
If you are doing business in China, your political views will be sanitized in favor of the Beijing government.
In some cases, working in China not only does not do that, but compromises American companies' ability to promote our values abroad and around the world.
For virtually anyone who wants to do business in China, the message is toe the Communist Party line or face threats of losing access to the market. What is that line? Often referred to as the 3 T's: Tibet, Taiwan, and Tiananmen. China considers Tibet's spiritual leader in exile, the Dalai Lama, to be a dangerous separatist, even though he's no longer pushing for Tibetan independence. On the subject of Taiwan, China views it as a Chinese province, even though it's self-governing and democratic. And Tiananmen, well, the uprising in 1989 killed anywhere from several hundred to thousands of people. It is a global symbol of the struggle for democracy, and democracy is a no-go in communist China.
And I now call on the Chinese leadership publicly, as I have in private channels, to avoid violence and to return to their previous policy of restraint.
More recently added to the no-go list for American companies, democracy protests in Hong Kong and the plight of Uyghur Muslims. Mostly, companies cave when China complains. Last year, U.S. airlines bowed to Chinese demands to change the way they refer to Taiwan on their websites. China's aviation authority also demanded Hong Kong and Macau be clearly labeled as part of China. The U.S. government called China's language police Orwellian nonsense.
The pages of George Orwell's 1984 are coming to life there.
The White House, in a statement, vowed to stand up for Americans, resisting efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to impose Chinese political correctness on American companies and citizens. But airlines obliged China. So did Gap, which quickly apologized for a T-shirt with a map of China that did not include Taiwan. More recently, the NBA initially distanced itself from comments from a team executive that were sympathetic to Hong Kong protesters. The result? Canceled games, severed business deals.
We are not apologizing for Daryl exercising his freedom of expression.
Both the NBA and China are now trying to cool this standoff, but it just shows how doing business in China presents unique challenges.
10-second trivia. Which of these adjectives describes a swelling of a lymph node? Bucolic, blastoporic, bubonic, or bolometric? Swelling of a lymph node is a bubo, so the adjective for that is bubonic. Bubonic is one of the most common types of plague, and that word itself often brings up thoughts of the Black Death, the plague that swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing as much as 60% of the people on the continent. But that's just one of 3 major plague pandemics that history has recorded over the past 2,000 years, and the disease isn't just a section in history books. 3 people in China were diagnosed with the plague this month. It's not as deadly a threat as it has been in the past, but it still is a threat in rare cases. And while there's a lot that scientists still don't know about the plague, Elizabeth Cohen discusses what they do.
The plague is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis, and most of the time humans get it from a flea bite. Back when plague was rampant and there was no treatment for it, plague could get into people's blood and it could turn their limbs black, and that's where we get the term Black Death. When the plague struck the Roman Empire in the 6th century, it went on to kill 25 million people. Eventually, the plague wiped out 60% of Europe. Now, before there were antibiotics, the plague would kill between 66 and 93% of people who got it. Now, with antibiotics, that mortality rate goes down to about 16%. So typically every year in the United States, 1 person dies of the plague and 7 people get sick. Fever, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting. If you get these symptoms and you're living in an area where it's known that the plague has been before, then you should go seek help from your doctor. And you should definitely go to your doctor if you develop huge lymph nodes. Sometimes people with the plague, they get lymph nodes the size of a chicken egg. Also, the Centers for Disease Control says you should never feed rodents like squirrels and rats, and you certainly shouldn't touch them after they've died. We've done a great job of getting rid of the plague almost entirely in this country. Better hygiene goes a long way, but you can't entirely get rid of the bacteria. It's not just a Dark Ages bacteria, it's still with us.
Plague was not a possible outcome in the original checkered game of life, and by that we mean the board game called Life. But it seems plague could have been on it, considering some of the other squares. Life, again the game, was invented by Milton Bradley, who was a printer, businessman, and inventor. He's probably best known as the founder of a famous American toy brand.
Without Abraham Lincoln, and really his beard, Milton Bradley, the godfather of board games, would have never existed. Bold statement, I know, but let me explain. The game of life. The spinner, the cars, the choices, college or career, kids or no kids, lawyer or farmer. This family game night staple was once a pretty morbid game. Back in the 1800s, Milton Bradley was in the lithograph business. Following the Republican National Convention of 1860, Bradley printed thousands of images of Abraham Lincoln, who was clean-shaven at the time. Shortly thereafter, Lincoln debuted his iconic beard, rendering all of Bradley's prints worthless. His lithograph business went belly up. So Bradley was forced to try something new. He came up with a board game, a seemingly dark and twisted board game appropriately named The Checkered Game of Life. The game functioned in a similar way to how it does now. There was a spinner, colored circles that moved around the board, and of course squares that could either make you or break you. The squares on the original game were overwhelmingly grim, boasting actions like disgrace, poverty, ruin, crime, prison. Regardless, the game flew off the shelves. Kids loved it, and Milton Bradley went on to own Family Game Night. Fast forward to about 100 years later. They revamped the game, trading Bradley's morbid squares for the more delightful ones like Payday or Graduation, which we have all come to know and love. And so there you have it, the story of the game called Life. Thanks, Lincoln.
A demonstration of strength reveals a weakness. This is the prototype of a new Cybertruck, which the Tesla Auto Company hopes to start selling in 2021. The design is bold and controversial, but shortly after Tesla's CEO said its glass wouldn't break even if you threw the kitchen sink at it, a metal ball went crack. To be fair, it did not go through the window, but when the designer tried again on the rear window, oops. As Time.com puts it, guess it's not all it's cracked up to be. Nothing's shatter foolproof, and even if it gives you a view into the when-dos and when-don'ts of testing, who's going to be making a pickup where metal balls are being thrown at your truck? You'd need to trade up for a tank and be thankful that even if something dreadful comes your way, you'll still have your steel to steal your vehicle, even if the view isn't what you glassed for. I'm Carl Azus. Tomorrow's show is our last one of the week before the Thanksgiving holiday. We hope to see you turkeys then.